Published by Modus Games and in conjunction with Arc System Works and Secret Base, today we have a review of Double Dragon Gaiden Rise of the Dragons, which is obviously from the popular beat-em-up series.
Yep, this new entry in the long-running series includes roguelite features, so we'll have a look at exactly how that affects the gameplay as we break down the game for you.
So has it turned out to be Billy No Mates?
Or is it more of a Jimmy All the Mates?
Well, let's find out.
It's going to take both skill and strategy to conquer the growing gangs of...
In an unexpected twist, the city has found itself engulfed in crime, with different gangs taking over the various areas. Billy and Jimmy Lee take it upon themselves to head into the city and take everyone out.
Absolutely. This is a bit of a retelling of the original story, and this time Marion, the girl that you rescued in the first game, joins your team as one of 4 playable characters.
There are a few twists and turns along the way, but they'll be entirely predictable.
So in terms of gameplay then, of course it is a beat 'em up and it does play in a pretty standard manner for the most part, but as we mentioned in the intro, it does have a roguelite element to it too, which actually does add quite a bit of replayability.
Yeah, it actually goes far deeper than we first realised when we were playing. Now as you play through the stages, at the end you get a choice of certain power-ups and boosts, don't you?
Yeah, so when you complete a stage, you'll have your screen of power-ups that you can choose from. You do need to buy them using the coins that you collect as you go through the levels, but the power-ups offered to you are random each time for yourself and a second player if you are playing in multiplayer.
Now before all of that, you actually get to choose where you go, so you can choose which gang you attack. Now interestingly, I've just read that depending on the choice you make, it has a dynamic structure, so the order in which you choose your missions actually affects the mission length, which you wouldn't be able to tell because they feel very handcrafted.
They do, yeah. I do remember reading something like that in the blurb when we put this in the upcoming last week, but it didn't quite translate when we were playing it. It didn't seem as if it was that important, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's a real balance, as we were talking about with the upgrades, between whether you can save enough cash for those upgrades, but that's also used for reviving your teammates.
Absolutely. So as you make your way through the levels, if you do have both of your characters, you'll have 2 each die, then you'll need to be revived. If you use that money, then that comes out of your pot that you can use for those upgrades. So sometimes it's just about making sure you're quite well stacked as you go further into the game to manage any potential game overs you might get so you can get to the end.
Now it's worth mentioning that, like Glen says, you've got the basic attacks, you can grab enemies to do grapple moves, but you also have a special bar that's shown in the corner of the screen here, and that won't cost you your health, but it can be very useful for getting health back when you combine it with some of those roguelite elements.
So certain moves that you take out, I think it's called crowd control, where you'll take a few enemies out at once, and depending on how many you do take out at once, you can then get health items to obviously restore your health, and you can also call your partner in to do a special move with you, which will use some of that special bar, or you can call them in permanently and switch if you are running low on health with character 1.
Yeah, that was a really interesting mechanic because it actually had a limited number of swaps that you could make, and there were a few times early on in our play session where I accidentally swapped and then couldn't swap back. But it also adds a good level of strategy because obviously if your health's running low, you can quickly tag out, and there are a few power-ups you could get that meant when you tagged out, your partner was then fully revived in terms of health.
Yep, again, so it goes back to those items that you can procure at the end of the stage. And what we didn't mention actually, what's really good about that is you can actually choose to forego them completely and get some money back. So on those first few levels where we were feeling quite brave, that's the option we were choosing, but obviously we needed to start powering up a little bit as the game went on, and some of the abilities do stack and you can actually end up with quite a powerful build.
Yeah. It really is the best elements of roguelite in that regard. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but as someone that doesn't tend to enjoy these games as much as you, Glen, for me it gave it that strategy that made me want to come back and try another run, in air quotes.
Yeah, I think when you think of the words roguelite, sometimes, or some people will be put off immediately, and I do understand that. And whilst it does still have that element to it, it definitely feels more like a roguelite, just in the sense that you can get a game over, a classic game over, whilst having that idea of permanent upgrades for that run. So as Mark said, it does definitely take the best elements of a roguelite and they merge really well with a beat 'em up. I was very pleasantly surprised.
Now on the note of the game over there's also something else you can buy, isn't there? Sometimes it will roll tokens. Was it tokens that you could buy?
Yeah, the tokens work differently to reviving in that if you revived, you would start immediately where you were. So for example, we revived on the final boss, unfortunately died, then had to use a token, and we started back at the beginning of that stage. So that's the big difference. So you can buy tokens as well at the end of stages, and they will certainly come in useful, but it's all about reviving if you want to really, push on and get far.
Now, one thing that Double Dragon is known for in the past is its platforming. I would say overall the level-to-level changes are quite nice, and they've obviously tried to introduce new aspects and elements as you go through, but some of the platforming doesn't quite sit or land as well as other aspects.
Yeah, I would agree. As a fan of the Double Dragon series, certainly back in the day, I remember playing it on the NES. I do feel other beat-em-ups over time have refined the formula, and Double Dragon to a fault loves its platforming sections, and whilst they're perfectly adequate here, I don't think they were necessary. They're necessary in terms of being a nod to the game's past, and that's nice, but I could have done without them.
There was one particularly platforming heavy stage, and I think we kind of went, well, that's enough.
For sure.
Now, this one is 2-player co-op. You can't have 4-player like some of the other ones, but you can unlock quite a wealth of characters.
Yeah, so there are 4 to begin with. Unfortunately, we only managed to play with 3. Somehow we managed to swap Marion out and end up with 2 versions of Billy or Jimmy, so that was a shame. We didn't get to see how she played. But as well as those 4, you can unlock another 9 as you play, so that's nice as well.
Yeah, bearing in mind that each of the characters does play very differently, such as the tank class character, and they'll also have negatives attached to them, like not being able to pick some of the melee weapons up off the ground.
And what was nice as well was the fact that Billy and Jimmy weren't just palette swaps. I fully expected them to be, but actually they themselves play quite differently too. So as we mentioned, there are 4 stages plus a final stage. I'm sure you would expect that, and you go through each of the 4 factions, the 4 different gangs, and obviously at the end of each of those stages there is a boss. But you can play the stages in any order, as Mark mentioned, so you could end up fighting a pretty tough boss first,
Yeah, and that's an interesting point actually. Depending on your choices, it really does mix up the difficulty as you progress through it. Double Dragon Gaiden takes a unique approach to its art and design. The characters look slightly unusual, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, they have that chibi, super deformed look about it, which works quite well. It did take me a second to reacclimatise to it, I must say, but actually it is a nice way to freshen up, an older franchise.
The environments themselves, though, look really good. There's a bit of parallax scrolling in the background. There's more detail going on than you might first think at first glance, and obviously the special moves and everything else.
And also because, we mentioned the platforming just now, whilst from a gameplay standpoint it doesn't always marry brilliantly, in terms of verticality it does really add to the parallax scrolling and things like that. It certainly helps the visual appeal to the game.
Performance-wise, things were quite smooth. It does use an element of screen shake. Now, I was doing my darndest to spot frame drops. I have to say, in this instance, Glen was the eagle eye and did notice a couple.
Yeah, just a couple of times. It wasn't anything major. It didn't really affect the gameplay, but every so often you just see a slight dip or a slight stutter. But on the whole, it ran pretty well.
I will say on that note, I didn't see an option to turn off the screen shake, and I know some people have a bit of an issue with that. Now, something that we definitely did enjoy were the sound effects. They had a really chunky nature to them, didn't they?
The sound effects, absolutely, and also just the brute force of the hits themselves. It wasn't just the sound that accompanied it. It just felt good. When you hit an enemy, you could feel the force behind it. Just to add to the audio section, the score itself is absolutely fantastic. It takes the classic Double Dragon theme.
Lucky me.
And it just revamps it. It's very bombastic. It's exactly what you want it to be for this sort of game.
The digital version will cost you £20.13, which is a slightly unusual price, but it is also a very reasonable one.
I would say so. I think if it were just a beat 'em up with 5 stages that we almost flew through, to be fair, we almost completed the whole game in one sitting, maybe then you're asking questions. But because of that roguelite nature, because of the replayability of the characters you can unlock, and the way that you can play the stages in any order, I do think that's actually a very fair price.
There is also a physical of this available, and that can actually be found for just over £20 already. So there you have it. That's Double Dragon Gaiden, Rise of the Dragons, played cooperatively with a cooperative review.
Absolutely. Yeah, enjoyable game this. I'm very pleased to see the Double Dragon series getting a new entry and getting a very good one as well.
Yeah.
Overall then, it gets a SwitchUp score of 84%.
There you have it. If you pick this one up, please do let us know what you think of it in the comment section below. Do you enjoy it? Don't forget, if you are looking for eShop credit to pick this game up, or any other game for that matter, of course, you can do so via our website, switchup.gg. You can get your eShop cards from there. You'll get yourself 5% back in cash back from our SwitchUp tokens, which you can then use, of course, against a future purchase. And for a couple more days, there is another 5% discount if you use the code SwitchUp.
Turns out it was Jimmy Aldermates.
It was indeed, yeah.
Brilliant. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!